Hello, thank you so much for joining me here today. My name is Katie Lear. I am a play therapist based in Charlotte, North Carolina, where I specialize in helping children with anxiety and OCD live better and happier lives. I also am the author of a new book, A Parent's Guide to Managing Childhood Grief, which is designed for parents and caregivers of grieving children in the elementary school age range, so about ages 5 to 11. And it's an activity book that helps parents and caregivers find play-based ways to help their kids process feelings of grief. So this is a talk especially for adults who have elementary school aged grievers in their lives, whether you are a parent, a caregiver, family friend, extended family, somebody who works with kids in this age range. I thought it might be helpful today to talk about why play is so important for grieving children, how that play can look, signs that play may not be going well, and ways that you can support your child through play. So thanks so much for being here. So we know that in general, there are a lot of differences between child grief and adult grief. For one, children tend to go through their grief process in bits and pieces. They sort of pick up those feelings, and when they've reached their capacity, they put them back down again. Children are a lot more likely to have a delayed response to grief or feel numb. On the surface, things may seem fine for grieving children, but underneath, they may be working through a lot. And children's grief may come out in unexpected ways, like problems with sleeping, problems at school, headaches, stomach aches, physical complaints. Another big way that children process grief differently is that anytime there's a big change or a life transition for young children, play is a big coping mechanism that helps them get through that time. So it can be really surprising and shocking and maybe even a little uncomfortable for adults when they notice grieving children playing out scenarios that resemble what has happened in their lives. So it's not uncommon for grieving children to show things like burying toys, holding funerals for their toys, acting out scenes that resemble what happened to their loved one who died, or creating imaginative play where people are traveling to and from heaven. It can be really, I think, worrying for adults who think that this might be a sign that something is wrong or that the child is thinking about things that they shouldn't be. In reality, it is almost always a sign of health. Children only play when they feel safe, and playing in this way is a sign that children are feeling comfortable and secure enough that they can start to work through these feelings through play. So let's talk a little bit about why play helps children who are grieving. We know that kids use imaginative play to learn about the world in general, in both good and bad times. It helps them practice new skills, and it helps them make sense of new ideas. So if you think about how children will often really get latched into one play scenario and like really go over it again and again and again for days or weeks and then kind of set it aside, that's a way that kids are learning through play. And that repetition is really helpful for grieving children. Repetition means that children can tell and retell their story and take something that at first feels so big and jarring and shocking, and over time help it feel more familiar and help create some logic through it. So repetition is one of the ways that play helps grieving kids. We also know that play helps put big feelings that are hard to express in words out into the world in a different way. So even really bright verbal kids can have a hard time naming their feelings, and they can really have a hard time naming feelings when it comes to grief because the emotions are just so big and so complex. So play gives kids another way to express these feelings that might be too large or too heavy to put into words, but still need to get out there. In addition to repeating a story, play also lets children rewrite their story. Things can happen in play that can't really happen in real life. And that is really empowering and can be really healing when a child has felt so out of control. There's so little control involved when somebody dies. And in play, there's this ability to play around with all of these different outcomes. People can die and come back to life. Wishes can be granted. Bad guys can go to jail. All kinds of things can happen in play that can't happen in real life. So that's a little background on why play can be so powerful and so helpful for kids. Before we talk about how to support kids in play, I did want to take one quick second to talk about what happens when play isn't going so well for children, and what are some signs that play might be an indicator that some extra help could be needed. Occasionally, when children have gone through something really stressful or traumatic, they may show something called post-traumatic play. This might be more likely to happen to grieving children whose loved one died in a way that's really violent or sudden or shocking. And it's sort of a way that children can get stuck in their grief and in their play and not really move forward through it. So I'm going to talk about a few ways that post-traumatic play might look so that you can keep an eye out for it with your own kids. Healthy play is really flexible. We tend to see that it's a little bit different every time a child sits down to play. Things might happen in a different order. You may see themes through the play, but each time they play, it's sort of a variation on a theme. When children are in post-traumatic play, it's very rigid. Things have to happen exactly the same way every time. There's a very set, stuck feeling. Healthy play also tends to be imaginative. It can be abstract. You might see metaphors in the play. It's not necessarily a realistic representation of what happened. In post-traumatic play, it does tend to be a lot more literal. If you imagine somebody who's had a trauma experiencing flashbacks, it's sort of like the play becomes the flashback for kids, and we see them repeating a specific scenario again and again in a pretty literal way. And then the last thing to keep out for is that play, when it's healthy, should be really soothing for children. Even when the content is difficult, it's a release to get those feelings out. And so children tend to look very relaxed, they look very free. And when they finish the play, they're feeling pretty good. In post-traumatic play, we often see that children are quite tense when they're playing. They're very focused. They might seem kind of agitated. And that feeling doesn't get released through the play. If anything, they might seem more worked up after the play is done than when it started. So if you're seeing some of these signs in your child's play, that might be a good indicator that it's time to talk to a counselor or talk to a pediatrician and see if you can find somebody to help them get a little bit unstuck and process those feelings in a way that's less overwhelming. So that's sort of our one caveat of when it may not be as helpful to get in there and support your child in play. Most of the time, it is really helpful. In my book, I have some very concrete activity-based examples of things you can do to help your child process grief, but it's not really necessary. Children cannot help but play. They play all the time, and you can support your child just by being supportive and being a witness to the play that they're already doing. That's actually a lot of what we do in play therapy. We are just showing that we're being good listeners and we are observing a child's play and supporting them without trying to get in there and push our own agenda in the play. So there are a few skills that you can practice at home to do that, to support your child's play without interfering too much or interrupting the flow of what they're doing. Before you try any of that stuff, I think the most important thing is to make sure that you are in a good place emotionally before you support your child in their play. It can be really triggering to see this stuff come up in a child's play, especially if you are also grieving. So take a minute to take care of yourself, make sure that you feel ready to do it, and try to understand that even if it's upsetting to see, this kind of play is how children grieve and how they process. So make sure that you feel like you're in an okay spot first and that you've taken care of yourself. When you're ready to play, I think when in doubt, one of the most helpful things you can do to support your child is to reflect back what you're hearing them say to you. So if you're not sure what else to do, if they have said something to you, you can restate it back to them. It's a way of passing the baton back in conversation and letting them know that you're sort of forfeiting your turn in talking and in playing, and that they can take the lead again. It also is a really good way to show that you're listening. So if your child says something like, oh, the bad guy's going to jail, you can just say, he's going to jail. If they say, the princess got lost, you can say, oh no, she's lost. You're just following their lead and letting them continue in the play. If they're playing a lot but not doing a lot of talking, you can do this same thing by describing the action you're seeing. So if you imagine that you're like a sportscaster, you are describing what you're seeing them do in the play. That might look like the car is going really slowly down the road, or you are really carefully putting all of that furniture in the dollhouse just the way you want it. You're just saying out loud what you're seeing them do, which helps keep them more mindfully involved and shows that you're paying attention. If your child asks you to participate in the play and you're sitting there holding your Barbie doll and you're like, what do I do? Like, oh gosh, like how am I supposed to do this? Imitate what they're doing. Kids love imitating adults, and they do it because they look up to adults and they want to be like adults. When we imitate children, it lets them know that we think what they are doing is important and we approve of what they're doing. And that's exactly the message that we want to convey to grieving kids. It is okay to talk about these things. It's okay to play about these things. So imitating is a good way to encourage that. And then the last thing is make sure that you continue to show enjoyment. Enjoyment and warmth are such a huge part of play, even when the subject matter is difficult. Playing is a wonderful way to reconnect with your child after loss and to reestablish that bond and that safe space that they need to heal. So this can look like a warm tone of voice, a smile, a hand on the back, or even just telling your child, I'm so happy to be spending this time with you. It's so nice to play with you. Those little things seem silly, but they can go a really long way toward helping your child feel connected again. The last thing I'll say, one thing that might be helpful to avoid when you're supporting your child in play is asking too many questions. And this is something that I've been guilty of before. I think it's just a habit when we're around kids. We'll say like, is that a doll? Oh, is that your house? Is that car going in the garage? I don't know why we all do it. I think we all do. But peppering kids with too many questions like that can kind of interrupt their flow, and it can even make some children a little bit nervous because they're getting pop quizzed all the time. So try to limit your questions. One question I will sometimes ask is sort of an I wonder type question, like, I wonder what that girl might be thinking right now. I wonder how it feels to be in that situation. Or if the soldier could talk to us, what do you think he would say? I think sometimes questions like that, where we're trying to get kids to reflect on the thoughts or the feelings of characters in the story, can be really interesting. You just want to make sure you don't overdo it. So imitate, reflect, describe what you're seeing, show enjoyment, and be judicious in how many questions you ask. I think that's a really great start and a really wonderful way to support any grieving child. Thank you so much for taking the time to learn about children and their grief today. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day, and I hope that you learn a lot. Thank you so much.